Welcome to Echoes of Indus, a podcast where we go beyond the textbooks and deep into the buried past of one of the most sophisticated civilization we ever know, the Harappa civilization. And it was one of the best civilizations in the world. So I'm your host Apurva, and before we talk and walk the streets of Harappa or gaze into the eyes of the dancing girl of the Mohenjo-daro, we need to rewind not just a few centuries, not just a few years, but thousands of years. And now you might think why? Because we are going back in time even more prior to what we discussed the last time. This is an introductory episode where we set the stage for everything to come. And let's start where the confusion often begins. It starts around 1500 BCE. A lot of us were taught that there was an invasion, nomadic people with horses came from Central Asia and overtook the existing civilization in India. But what if I told you that this story doesn't hold up anymore? That there was no dramatic conquest, no sudden toppling of a culture. Instead, there was a vast, thriving civilization in Indian subcontinent, the Indus Valley Civilization. A culture that built cities before Rome and traded with Mesopotamia, and engineered the sanitization system better than many of the modern towns. Mind me, better than modern towns. These days, it's just flood everywhere whenever it rains. But those people were genius. And this isn't just poetic nationalism. This is backed by evidence. There is climatic data, there's archaeology, there's satellite imaging, and most importantly, there's science. Now let's just zoom out and look at human history through a wide-angle lens. The first great wave of urbanization in Mesopotamia. It began in the land between Tigris and Euphrates River around 3500 BCE. And here the Sumerians birthed the first city-state that developed cuneiforms and built ziggurats, that are the temples during that day, and very high temples because they believed that the gods live in the sky. Shortly after came the Egyptian civilization with pyramids, with pharaohs, and with the Nile River, the spine of its civilization. Civil planning, writing, and astronomy all flourished in the river's fertile embrace. And then around 2600 BCE, on the banks of now lost Saraswati and Indus River, rose Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Cities were built with fire bricks, with precise drainage, and with eerie sense of symmetry. It was an artwork to look at the civilization those days. And this was not like the Indus Valley civilization. This is not new for us. We have developed a very advanced civilization way before everything was there. And finally, by 2000 BCE, urbanization touched the Yellow River Valley in China. With the rise of early dynastic cultures like early II, often linked to the Shia dynasty, we were not the last ones, and neither were we the first. So Harappa was not late to the party. It was prior and a pioneer in its own right. But what happens to this genius civilization? If Sanskrit came from the Aryans and the Aryans came after the Harappa, then what came before Sanskrit? Who were these people? And what language did they speak? What culture did they follow? And how did they govern themselves? We don't know anything about them, and this episode is your answer. Let's dive deep. The Indus Valley Civilization, which peaked from 2600 to 1900 BCE, didn't fall to invaders. Instead, it declined gradually to environmental shifts. Yes, you heard it right. It was the nature, not man. The Ghaggar-Hakra river, believed by many to be Saraswati, dried up due to tectonic movements and due to monsoon failures. The trade routes with Mesopotamia collapsed, and the people, they moved towards the east, towards the Ganges, and they adapted and they evolved as anyone should do, and anyone does, because the change is the way of life. So where did the myth of invasion come from? Let's get into that. In the 19th and the 20th century, the colonial archaeologists like Mortimer Wheeler interpreted evidence of skeletal remains in Mohenjo-daro as proof of a massacre. He proposed that, these were the victims of Aryan conquest, because there were quite a number of skeletons that were found at our place. But recent studies, including those by Kenneth Kennedy of Cornell and Irfan Habib, tell a completely different story. Those skeletons, they were scattered across different stratigraphic levels. This is the first point. Second, there was no sign of violence. Third, the victims were of natural cause, not war. And Kenoyer, yes, the same professor Jonathan Mark Kenoyer, who will be our guide in the upcoming episodes, also argues for a slow ecological decline. The droughts, the river shift, and internal transformations, not destruction. Meanwhile, genomic studies published in Cell and Nature journals like Narasimha's 2019 paper and with his other colleagues shows that there is a genetic continuity between Harappans and the modern South Asians. And the so-called Aryan invasion, or better described as gradual Indo-Aryan migration, likely influencing but not erasing the existing cultures. It was not a new culture that was introduced to us per se. Now let's talk about those skulls, the remains you have heard about in Mohenjo-daro. The 37 skulls that were, or skeletons that were initially found, on further analysis, it was revealed that they didn't die in one place or in one event. George Dales, in his 1964 study, demolished the idea of a violent massacre. No arrowheads, no weapons, and no mass burial. In Lothal and Kalibangan, signs of floods and fires have been found. And I think this is not just it. There were signs of earthquake that have redirected the river. It was nature, again not man, that nudged this great civilization into decline. And no, people didn't just disappear because of the calamity that was there. As people should, they migrated eastwards, adapted, and many scholars believe that their descendants contributed to the Vedic culture, because some of the things are similar to that of Harappan civilization. It's not all new. And let me take you through a visualization so that you can have a good picture of how the Harappan civilization looked like. Imagine you are in 2600 BCE. The clay bricks are still warm from the kiln, bustling market, merchants haggling over carnelian beads, and children running. There is splashing in the perfectly planned grains, priests tending to the fire atop of a citadel. And far away, the sound of water, the mighty Saraswati, still flows in your ears, and it still flows at its peak. Now imagine the monsoon grew erratic. The harvest starts to shrink. The river that was once the lifeblood begins to dwindle. The family starts to move. Some go to east, others adapt. And languages, obviously, they tend to shift because there is cultural evolution. But their memory, their roots, and their blood, it continues. That can't be lost. This is where the story begins. We're not just descendants of Vedic chants and shloks. We are children of terracotta seals, of bronze tools, and of mysterious script no one has ever cracked yet. Yes, you heard it right. The script has not been cracked. In the next two episodes, we'll take a deeper look into Harappa and Mohenjo-daro using brilliant research of Professor Jonathan Mark Kenoyer. And we will also examine how these cities were governed, how these cities functioned, and what the people believed. And on top of that, what were the languages spoken, what was the means of communication that was there, and how were they well connected to the rest of the world, because that is the major part of any civilization to grow. And we'll discuss also about the undeciphered script, not just its mystery, but what it might tell us about early communication as a tool. Because language is the key. We'll dive into art, jewelry, burial customs, and try to understand who these people were. Because to understand where we are going, we must know where we come from. And we must be connected to our roots. Not through myth, because myths are usually historical facts distorted, but through facts, echoes, and through archaeology, we'll dive deep. We'll learn a lot. So if this excites you, stay tuned. Episode 1 drops next. Harappa, the lost city, and the city of ingenious minds. This is Apurva, your host, and signing off. And thank you for listening to Echoes of Indus, where we unravel the past and the future lessons, future gains knowledge. Bye bye, until the next time.